The thing that fascinates me about the trees in a tropical rainforest is that directly or indirectly, everything else that lives in this forest depends on them for shelter, for food. If you look, you may just think that at first glance all you see are a mass of green leaves that are indistinguishable. But really, these trees are as individual as any of your dear friends. In fact, this is an old friend of ours. I've been following this tree for over 2 years now, along with the others of the same species, looking at its relationships with the other plants and animals in this forest, trying to define how it interacts with them and its importance in making a tropical rainforest what it is.
This is a film about the Amazon forest and some of the scientists working in it. The jeep's been donated by the World Wildlife Fund. The research project is jointly run with Brazil's Amazon Research Institute, and the project director is Rob Biergaard.
A storm like the one we had last night is what puts the capital R in Rainforest. Makes driving up hills like that one pretty interesting. This forest goes on for hundreds of thousands of square kilometers. If you were to walk due north from here, the first thing you'd hit would be the plains of Roraima and then Venezuela. We're driving up to one of our base camps that services 5 of our reserves. We've been working in these study areas now for almost 2 years, studying the different plants and animals in their natural state in the virgin forest.
The project's located about 100 kilometers north of the Brazilian city of Manaus, and it's planned to last 20 years. It's the most ambitious and systematic study ever launched about a tropical forest.
The tropical rainforest can be likened to a giant machine whose cogs or species interreact in ways that are as yet largely unknown. The ever-increasing pressure to utilize the resources of the tropical rainforest mean that the remaining tracts of forest are becoming smaller and smaller. With this decrease in size comes an inevitable loss of species. What we do not know today is how many species can be lost, how many cogs can stop spinning before the entire system ceases to function.
Near their base camp, areas varying from 1 to 1,000 hectares have been marked out as reserves within the virgin forest. By studying the interaction between plants and animals, both before and after the surrounding forest is cut down, the researchers hope to gain a better understanding of how the forest works.
Fantastic.
Yeah, that one's all yours.
Illuminating monster. There we go.
This is an ant shrike, female ant shrike. Okay, recapture. So this is a bird we've banded before in one of our other nets. Her band number is 50115. It's a female, Fredericina viridis.
Okay.
One of the things that we find in the isolated reserves is that the birds actually start to lose weight. If conditions are not optimal for their survival, rather than flee the reserve, we may actually note a change in the weight of the birds. So we've been taking a lot of information on body weights of all the birds in the undisturbed forest and then in the isolated reserves. Okay, this bird weighs, with her card, 70 grams. This beak with which she's doing serious damage to my thumb is used in the pursuit of insects. She feeds on large insects in the forest, normally moving alone or with her mate.
Rob specializes in birds which live near the ground rather than in the canopy. And during the last 3 years, they've caught, tagged and released over 20,000 birds. It's this repeated capture of the same birds which helps him understand their needs and way of life.
This is the second time we've caught this bird today. When he was first trapped, he didn't have any of this pollen along his beak. And we know that since he's been caught, he's been visiting flowers. And he's drinking nectar. He's got a very long tongue that goes down into flowers, drinking the nectar. And while he's doing that, he gets pollen on his beak. When he goes to the next flower of the same species, some of that pollen will rub off on the reproductive organs of the flower and therefore fertilize the seeds of that flower. So this is one of the interactions that's crucial to the survival of the ecosystem. If these hummingbirds can't survive in a small reserve, there will be certain species of plants that will eventually die out because their reproduction will cease. Okay, he can go now. What are you doing?
Blow, don't you do that?
What?
Blow it so it
Blow it
goes?
away?
Yeah.
No.
When they do that, Felch and I always do that because they just stand there, and the minute we blow them,
Oh.
they're gone.
We're coming up now on two of our forest reserves that are completely isolated by this farmer's cattle pasture. We've been studying these reserves for about 2 years to see what bird species and what plant species are going to disappear in the isolated tracts of forest.
It's the isolation of the reserves that's the key to the research. This 10-hectare reserve contains over 6,000 trees. Before it was isolated, it was surveyed, laid out in a grid, and the trees recorded and numbered. So when the surrounding forest was cleared, it was easy to observe the changes that occurred. 5 new species of tree have already been discovered by the botanical team led by Judy Rankin.
Vamos pegar essa árvore aqui primeiro, all right? In this area here, we're beginning to recollect the same trees that we studied over a year ago to see what the differences are. How many trees that were too small to be included in our survey originally have grown up to the minimum size for the study, and to find out how many of them have actually died in the interval. Even though a tree can't run away from you when you try to study it, it's still a difficult proposition because the action's all up there in the tree crown, 20, 30, 40 feet above your head. And from this vantage point, you really can't see very much what's going on.
Tio, joga o galho aqui. É.
Even when you can climb up and collect a sample, sometimes you come away with what's just the equivalent of a few tail feathers of a bird. A sterile example like this really doesn't tell you too much about what's going on with the relationships between the pollinators and the dispersal agents from this tree. What we'll have to do is this material will be pressed, cataloged in our collection, and we'll eventually have to come back to this tree when it's in flower and fruit to enable us to continue to study the interaction of the animals with this particular species.
Without the wildlife, the trees could not reproduce, and without the trees, the animals would have no food or habitat. One-tenth of all the world's species live in the Amazon, as interlocked and dependent on each other as pieces in a Chinese puzzle.
One of the outstanding differences between plants and animals is that plants can't move around. They're fixed in the ground for the rest of their lives. And one of the problems of a tree in the rainforest is to move its seeds into an environment where the seedling can successfully establish itself and grow up into another healthy adult. The question is, exactly what is it that is assisting the seed in making this vital move in its life cycle? Luis, do you have any idea what might be taking care of this? It obviously is a highly visible object on the rainforest floor.
Smells very good too, doesn't it?
Smells like mangoes.
Well, right away I would say that it couldn't possibly be dispersed by either birds or monkeys, because both of those have to swallow the seeds whole in order to disperse them. And this is so big it would choke a gorilla. So my best guess would be that this falls on the forest floor and is picked up by one of the larger rodents, such as an agouti, which eats off the surface and carries it away from the tree. The interesting thing about this is that the aril is covering a seed which isn't well protected at all. There's no hard shell on this seed, but the animal which is eating off the aril is not touching it at all. So I expect that this might be very poisonous.
I think that perhaps this can be confirmed by the fact that we know that this particular seed takes over a month to germinate in the rainforest, and therefore would have to be protected somehow, perhaps by toxic substances, to prevent it from being attacked by animals.
One of the rewards of working at night is that one encounters all kinds of creatures that you never see by day. Oh, here's something. This is a bucco marinus. He's one of the largest of the amphibians in the world. Sitting there quite calmly because he really doesn't have anything to worry about from predators, because he's extremely poisonous. These big spots here are poison glands. Let's see if he'll produce any poison. There's enough poison in these glands here to kill a dog. Let's see if he's about to get away here. There he goes.
This is the way a tropical rainforest renews itself. When a large tree such as this falls, creating a small gap, it allows light to penetrate to the forest floor. There, the small plants that have been waiting in the understory can then grow up and take their place as adults in the canopy. The Indians were able to utilize the rainforest without destroying it by following the same process of natural regeneration. Their agricultural clearings were of a small scale, and they only cultivated them for a limited period of time, then moving on and leaving the area to regenerate itself. The problem with modern agricultural clearings that are generally on a large scale is that you break this natural cycle of regeneration, and the forest cannot recover.
The 3 ranches on which the reserves are located cover roughly 100,000 acres. A fifth of this area has already been cleared, but the ranchers have agreed to leave in the middle of their cattle ranges the small blocks of jungle chosen as reserves. This is the ranch on which 2 of the reserves are located, reserves of 1 and 10 hectares.
Tudo bem?
Bem, Batirão, como é que vai?
Tudo bom. E a voz?
Tá um pouquinho rouca ainda, né?
A chuva,
É a
né?
chuva, muita chuva, né?
Demais.
Demais.
O desmatamento lá no fim vai continuar como foi programado ou vai demorar um pouco?
Não, tá dentro daquela programação, né, Rob? Aqueles 1.000 hectares que nós vamos desmatar. Tem aquela reserva que você ficou de escolher para deixar dentro, né? Vai continuar, tá? A programação feita, os 1.000 hectares.
E vai começar em março?
É, deve esperar baixar um pouco a chuva, né? Isso deve ocorrer lá pelos dias, primeira dezena de março.
The ranchers usually clear well over 1,000 hectares per year, and one of the unexpected effects of deforestation is that it causes change even in the jungle which is left standing.
One of the immediate impacts of isolation of a patch of forest by a pasture surrounding it is the effect of wind. The wind comes roaring across these open spaces at an incredible speed. And unlike in a closed forest where the wind goes across the top of the canopy of the forest, these winds hit the reserve broadside from all sides. And one of the things that we've been able to note in this study, where we've been following individual trees, is the fact that the number of wind throws, trees that are actually thrown over by the pressure of the wind itself, seems to have increased. Other areas where isolation of small patches of rainforest has taken place for a number of years, we can see that the forest actually falls apart, the trees crashing to the ground and its entire physical structure being disrupted. More wind, more light, less humidity, and the environment changed radically for all of the species present in that forest.
We have here a colony of Eciton burchellii, which is making a swarm raid to the south of us. This particular raid started about dawn this morning and is now probably approximately 100 meters from here. This swarm of burchellii is bivouacked in this tree behind me here and will stay here for approximately 21 days. The problem I am studying is what sort of area the ants require to survive, and also what sort of area the birds that follow the ants require to survive as well.
These birds follow the army ant swarms and prey on those insects that are fleeing from the army ants. So when an insect on the forest floor finds an army ant swarm coming, if that ant swarm has army ant birds with it, the insect's in a real lot of trouble. Either the ants are going to get them or there's a good chance that the birds will. The interesting thing in terms of our study about these birds is that the army ants tend to move large distances and also tend to spend large periods of time inactive. And when that happens, the birds that follow the army ants obligately have to go look for another active ant swarm. Okay, so now let's let them get back to work and find another ant swarm.
I'm radio tracking my bird here, trying to locate him. He appears to be at the front of the army ant swarm here, probably not more than about 50 meters away. And I can pick up the beeps from the radio transmitter, which I attached to his back approximately 1 week ago. And since that time, I've been radio tracking him through the forest here, and he appears to be following the army ants every day during the day. And at night, he in fact also sleeps near the army ants. He will roost near the army ants about 30 minutes before sunset.
And so the army ant either kills or scares the butterfly, which is then eaten by the antbird, which in its turn is the normal prey of a hawk.
The hawk was a Macrastur gilvacalis. It's a barred forest falcon that feeds on small birds. I placed a radio transmitter on this small falcon several days ago, and I was able to follow the falcon through the forest. It appeared as though the falcon was in fact following the birds that were following the ants in order to have a food source in the bird flock.
We can tell by these remains, the enlarged voice box and the cranium, that this was a young male howler monkey, one of the troop of 8 howler monkeys originally present in this area at the time of isolation. He probably died due to the stress placed on himself and his group to survive in an area much smaller than that which would usually be occupied by monkeys of this species. This isn't the only group of monkeys which has suffered the effects of being stranded in a forest patch that's too small to support them. There was a pair of fruit-eating monkeys present here in this reserve at the time of isolation as well. Despite the fact that they consumed the seeds and immature fruits of many of the tree species, the food supply in this area proved inadequate to support them. With the death of these fruit-eating monkeys, that species then became locally extinct.
Just as the death of a species reveals its needs, so the whole project depends, ironically, on the cutting of the very forest they're trying to protect. For it's only after the reserve has been isolated that the revealing changes occur.
The great paradox of the tropical rainforest is that the world's richest and most diverse biological formation has its roots in some of the Earth's oldest and poorest soils. The explanation of this paradox lies in the incredible efficiency and speed with which the biological community recycles nutrients. A classic example of this is this tree, which has somehow sensed the presence of a rotting log at its base and sent out this system of roots to absorb the nutrients and send them back into living tissue even before they have a chance to hit the surface of the forest floor. So that when the forest is cut, not only is the wildlife lost, but so too are the nutrients that supported them.
And when you break this system and release the nutrients as have been done here, there's no ecological recycling which can pick them up and restore them to living plant and animal tissues. These nutrients are then lost in the rains and due to erosion and can no longer be counted on for future growth. The most important thing to understand is that when you cut the trees of a tropical rainforest, you don't just destroy the trees themselves, you destroy all of the other species which depend on them. And in effect, you destroy the world's most diverse ecosystem.
If you have always lived under the canopy of the jungle, it's a revelation to find out that you can actually watch the storms patrol across the forest, watering it just like a lawn. That you can observe the clouds, the trees, and the sun all working together in the vast, unceasing mechanism which is the climate. Dr. Enias Salati is the Brazilian scientist who has organized and coordinated much of the research into the climate of Amazonia. Dr. Salati, a floresta é uma consequência do clima ou clima depende da floresta?
A minha hipótese de trabalho é que a floresta não é uma simples consequência do clima, mas que o atual equilíbrio ecológico, incluindo o climático, na bacia amazônica, é consequência de uma interação constante entre a floresta e a atmosfera. E não é necessário variações muito grandes, bastaria uma diminuição de 10 a 20% na precipitação para que diversos ecossistemas fossem totalmente modificados, com desaparecimento de algumas espécies e seleção de outras.
This film is about the fascinating relationship between the rain and the rainforest. It's an attempt to relate what anyone can see in and above the forest to the pattern of how it all works produced by science. It's a pattern or model based on many different research techniques carried out by scientists from a variety of countries.
With these instruments, we are measuring the stem flow with trees of different diameter. Here, we are measuring the so-called leaf drip, the rainwater falling down from the leaves. And here, we are measuring the chemical concentrations of different depths of the subsurface water. This research work will give us basic information of the function of the water balance and nutrient cycling in natural conditions.
Since rain falls on every inch of forest and is absorbed through the trees and soil, so the rivers carry traces of everything upstream. A survey of the waste matter in the rivers is thus a way of monitoring what's happening in the lands they drain. For the last 15 years, there's been a continuous program measuring and sampling the rivers of Amazonia. For several decades, statistics on evaporation, rainfall and solar energy have also been collected in 100 stations all over the Amazon. And the results have been analyzed, mainly in Manaus, by the National Institute for Amazonian Research. Samples of rain and river water have in addition been sent by 17 strategically placed stations to a laboratory in the south of Brazil. The samples of rain are undergoing the isotopic analysis of their oxygen and hydrogen. This makes it possible to discover the origin of the water vapor that produces a particular sample of rain. For instance, whether that rain originated from the forest or from the ocean. Dr. Salati is head of Brazil's Center for the Use of Nuclear Techniques in Agricultural Research. For 15 years, he's been using these isotope tracing techniques for his study of the climate of Amazonia.
Neste departamento, nós determinamos as composições isotópicas para a determinação das concentrações de oxigênio 18 e deutério nas amostras de água que nós trazemos da região amazônica e de outras regiões do Brasil. E eu gostaria de mostrar-lhe algumas conclusões colocadas em forma de gráfico. Utilizando diferentes técnicas e métodos de medida, chegamos à seguinte conclusão para o caso de um ecossistema de floresta densa, que da precipitação total, 25% volta para a atmosfera por evaporação direta das folhas. 25% sai para formar os rios que depois formam o próprio rio Amazonas. E da água que vem para o solo, 50% do total correspondente à precipitação volta para a atmosfera através da transpiração das plantas.
Clouds are thus partly the condensed breath of trees, forming a mantle of transpired vapor which shelters the breathers from the sun. Without the trees, the clouds would not be here. And without water vapor in the atmosphere, leveling out extremes in temperature, this most fertile of forests would be desiccated by the equatorial sun. Every day, as the clouds develop into storms, they are photographed by satellite and studied in Brazil's National Space Institute.
We have a considerable amount of cumuliform cloud development in various regions of the southern part of the Amazon basin today.
Can you see how they're forming there?
Yes, by animating the cloud pictures here, showing a sequence of pictures in a row, we can see the growth of the clouds with time. Note this one here, and how it grows from a little cell to a much larger cell with time. These cells are formed through evaporation, local evaporation.
And what will happen to them? Will they blow away or will they rain there? Or?
These will probably dissipate more or less in the same area that they've formed. For one thing we can see readily from these animated satellite images is the general east to west propagation of cloud systems over the Amazon basin. We can see that this portion of that water vapor originates in the Atlantic or along the sea breeze front that forms along the coast. That moisture advances inland over the Amazon basin at a rate of about 5 to 10 meters per second.
This flow of water vapor from east to west is equally visible if you go to the Atlantic seacoast near the mouth of the Amazon. In the classic pattern of climate textbooks, the sun applies energy to the sea, evaporating its water into vapor. As the vapor builds into clouds, They are carried inland by the trade wind and the sea breeze. But the area roughly 200 kilometers inland, where the clouds first discharge, has been largely deforested over the last decade. Instead of thick jungle covering the ground and absorbing storms like a sponge, this rain will fall on unprotected soil. The first result is that more rain is wasted, instead of being held by the trees and then returned to the sky. This has the local effect of washing out nutrients, eroding soil, and silting rivers downstream. But it affects the whole of Amazonia because there's less water to evaporate back into the sky.
Essas fotografias tiradas através de satélite Landsat. Essa área desmatada, ela aparece aqui no sul dessa imagem, na região sul. Ela está localizada no município de Paragominas, no estado do Pará, Brasil.
Parece aquela região é bem desmatada.
Sim, esse município é bastante desmatado. Há 10 anos que ele vem ocorrendo esse processo de desmatamento. Lá em cima é aquela fazenda. Bom, aqui então nós temos outro tipo de vegetação. A rebrota de vegetação natural seria o verde mais claro, a pastagem seria em amarelo.
Since grassland holds less rain than forest, on this ranch called Fazenda Rio Kawashi, there will be less water to evaporate into the sky. In addition, fields of annual crops, shown here in different colors, transpire water vapor less effectively than forest because they are only fully grown once or twice a year. And so, less of the rain that comes from the ocean to fall on these ranches carries on into Amazonia.
A conclusão geral é que o vapor de água proveniente do Oceano Atlântico move para dentro do continente pelos ventos que sopram do quadrante este. Perto da costa, este vapor d'água transforma-se em nuvem e dá origem às chuvas locais. Parte desta chuva volta à atmosfera através da evapotranspiração pela floresta. Este vapor mistura-se agora com o vapor proveniente do oceano. As chuvas subsequentes serão formadas por esta mistura de vapor, formando um ciclo que se propaga para o oeste.
From the sea, it's over 1,000 kilometers to Manaus, and the fronts cover this in a day, moving inland at roughly 50 kilometers an hour. In Amazonia, more rain falls on a greater mass of vegetation, producing with the sun's energy more organic matter than anywhere else. The Amazon is the planet's greatest and richest factory of life. Amazonia has 1/6 of the world's fresh water, 1/5 of its forest. It seems impossible that anything could affect this massive, completely overpowering climate system.
O que estamos olhando nesta área branca sobre a Amazônia corresponde a mais de 200 bilhões de toneladas de água. A existência desta grande quantidade de água sobre a região amazônica durante o ano todo está na dependência, em grande parte, da energia solar incidente na região, a qual corresponde à explosão de aproximadamente 6 milhões de bombas atômicas por dia. No entanto, a dinâmica deste complexo sistema depende da interação de órgãos tão simples quanto as folhas das plantas, as quais transferem a água do solo para a atmosfera. Assim sendo, o equilíbrio desse ecossistema fica bastante vulnerável à ação do homem moderno.
Eu estou analisando o crescimento da área desmatada na Amazônia. Essas três imagens tiradas pelo satélite Landsat, essa aqui é de julho de 73, a floresta seria em preto e a área desmatada estaria em branco. Nessa imagem aqui, que já é de 1977, de julho de 77, aquela área que estava em 73 seria essa área aqui. E essa outra aqui mostraria o crescimento que esta área sofreu até 1977. Esta outra imagem aqui é de 1981, de junho de 1981. A área que era em 73, ela tinha esse tamanho. Agora, então, esse crescimento aqui, essa área desmatada mostraria 1977, e este pedaço aqui já mostraria o crescimento até 1981.
Mas a área total sofreu
um grande crescimento, desde 1973 até 81.
As most estimates are that an area larger than Portugal is deforested every year. This is bound to affect the climate.
Mas o que é mais importante é que na floresta, normalmente, a energia solar é utilizada para a transpiração da água, enquanto que no solo ela é absorvida e transformada em calor que aquece a atmosfera, havendo assim uma diferença no ciclo da energia no ecossistema. E, ainda mais, ela afeta de maneira bastante acentuada o ciclo do carbono. Porque, como você está vendo, essa floresta tem aproximadamente 1.000 toneladas de matéria de biomassa por hectare, enquanto que o solo preparado para a agricultura tem uma quantidade muito menor. E exatamente essa diferença de biomassa vai para a atmosfera na forma de gás dióxido de carbono.
Roughly 800 tons of carbon go into the sky from every hectare of forest burnt. In the Earth's atmosphere, the carbon dioxide is now increasing at roughly 1% every 3 years, with half this increase contributed by forests. And since carbon dioxide has a greenhouse effect that retains heat beneath it, this will probably cause the temperature of the Earth to rise.
In the middle of the dry season in Brazil, last September, there occurred a great number of forest fires, which produced so much smoke that all of Brazil was seen to be covered by a pall of smoke extending from the area of São Paulo in southern Brazil all the way up into the northern hemisphere. Looking at the difference here between this gray and the black area, the gray area is a pall of smoke. The black area is the normal clear sky condition where we see the land without clouds.
The clouds over the Amazon bring rain to its surrounding regions, like this stream of clouds moving into central Brazil. With climate, it's always difficult to make accurate predictions, but major deforestation in Amazonia would almost certainly reduce the rain moving into the great agricultural region of central Brazil.
É bom lembrar que em outras regiões do mundo, que já foram densamente vegetadas, hoje são áreas semidesérticas, como é o caso do Irã e do Iraque. No caso específico do Brasil, é bom lembrar que parte das precipitações do Planalto Central brasileiro são provenientes do vapor transportado da região amazônica. Assim, a colonização intensiva e um desmatamento não controlado poderá trazer uma diminuição de chuvas nessa região de grande interesse para a produção agrícola do país.